Most of what you think is holding you back isn't your circumstances. It isn't lack of opportunity. It isn't bad luck. And it isn't even other people. It's you, specifically the story you've been telling yourself about who you are. Ego doesn't announce itself as arrogance. If it did, we'd catch it immediately. Ego arrives as confidence, as ambition, as the belief that you're meant for more. And sometimes that belief is even justified. That's what makes ego so dangerous. Because ego doesn't destroy you by stopping you. It destroys you by convincing you that you're already ready. It tells you that wanting something is the same as earning it, that being busy is the same as being effective. That recognition is the same as progress. That money proves wisdom. That success means immunity. It doesn't. In fact, ego is the one thing that can follow you through every phase of life, from aspiration to discipline to success to wealth to failure, and quietly sabotage all of them while making you feel justified the entire time. Here's the irony. The more talented you are, the more ambitious you are, the smarter you are, the more dangerous ego becomes. Because it has better arguments, better excuses, better stories. It tells you you're different, that the rules don't apply to you, that patience is for other people. That humility is weakness, that slowing down means falling behind, and so you rush. You overextend, you speak before you understand, you spend before you're secure, you identify with success before it's stable. And then one day you're confused because you did everything right, and yet something feels fragile, heavy, unsustainable. That feeling has a name. It's ego finally collecting interest. This isn't a talk about motivation. It's not about confidence. It's not about dreaming bigger. It's about the enemy inside you that shows up when things are going well, not when they're falling apart. Because failure humbles you, success tests you, and ego is strongest when you think you've won. If you want real freedom, financial, personal, creative, this is the fight you can't afford to lose. Not once, not ever. Because the biggest obstacle to your next level is not that you're not good enough. It's that you might already think you are. Before anything else is built, before money, before success, before recognition, there is a moment that defines everything that follows. It's the moment you decide who you think you are. Most people get it wrong at the very beginning. They mistake ambition for entitlement. They mistake confidence for competence. They mistake wanting something badly for deserving it. I know this because I've been there. I've watched it happen to people far more talented than me. I've watched it destroy promising careers, distort judgment, and quietly poison the very thing it claims to protect: ambition. Ego doesn't arrive as arrogance at first. That would be too obvious. Ego arrives as excitement, as hunger, as the belief that you are different, that you see what others don't, that you're meant for more. And here's the dangerous part. Sometimes that belief is true. You are capable of more. You do have potential. But ego takes that raw potential and rushes it forward prematurely, before it's earned, before it's tested, before it's stabilized. Ego whispers, "We're special." Reality responds, "Then prove it." Most people never hear the second voice. At the beginning, when you're young or inexperienced or just starting something new, the world is generous with illusions. Social media rewards confidence, not competence. Culture celebrates visibility over mastery, noise over substance. And if you're not careful, you begin to perform success instead of building it. That's where ego thrives. Ego wants the title before the work, the reward before the sacrifice, the authority before the apprenticeship. It wants to skip steps and call it efficiency. But skipping steps doesn't make you faster, it makes you fragile. The ancient Stoics understood this deeply. They warned that the greatest threat to progress isn't failure, it's early success. Because failure humbles you. Success inflates you. And an inflated self-image cannot fit through the narrow door that real growth requires. At the beginning, the real work is not standing out. It's disappearing. It's becoming a student, learning how little you know, and being grateful for that realization instead of threatened by it. Here's a principle that matters far beyond philosophy, even into money and freedom. Ego makes you expensive. An ego-driven life costs more. It requires validation, recognition, lifestyle signaling, constant comparison. You spend before you earn. You consume before you compound. You optimize for how things look instead of how they work. And that is a terrible foundation for wealth. True financial freedom is built quietly. It favors patience, humility, and restraint. Ego hates all three. I've seen people make money early and lose it faster because ego convinced them the income was proof of permanence. It wasn't. It was a test. A test they failed by upgrading their identity instead of their systems. Ego at the beginning tells you to speak when you should listen, to teach when you should learn, to lead when you should follow. And the cost of that mistake is usually invisible at first. It shows up later as missed fundamentals, weak foundations, and blind spots that only reveal themselves under pressure. Aspiration is not the enemy. Ego is. Aspiration says, I want to be better. Ego says, I already am. That difference determines everything. The most effective people I've met, the ones who last, the ones who build real wealth, real influence, real autonomy, share a common trait early on. They were willing to be underestimated. They didn't rush to brand themselves. They didn't announce their arrival. They didn't confuse attention with progress. They worked. They treated obscurity as an advantage, not an insult. Because obscurity gives you room to fail privately, to experiment, to learn without performance pressure. Ego hates obscurity because it doesn't feed the image, but obscurity is where skill is forged. This applies directly to money. People who chase money to prove something usually spend it to maintain the proof. People who build money as a byproduct of mastery tend to keep it, grow it, and use it strategically. Ego-driven ambition wants shortcuts. It asks, how do I get rich fast? Disciplined ambition asks, what skills, systems, and habits would make me valuable for decades? One is a lottery ticket. The other is compounding. Ego also distorts risk at the beginning. It convinces you that boldness means recklessness, that humility is weakness, that patience is fear. But real boldness is doing the unglamorous work consistently when no one is watching. Real confidence is not needing applause. Real courage is submitting yourself to a process that might take longer than your pride wants. This is why the early phase matters so much. It sets your internal scoreboard. Are you measuring progress by attention or by competence? By money spent or value created? By speed or by depth? If your scoreboard is external, ego controls you. If it's internal, you control yourself. And self-control is the root of all freedom. The Stoics had a phrase for this: ruling yourself before trying to rule anything else. It's not poetic, it's practical. A person who cannot control their impulses cannot control money. A person who cannot tolerate humility cannot sustain success. A person who needs recognition cannot be free, because recognition is given by others, and whatever others give, they can take away. Show and take away. Ego puts your freedom in someone else's hands. At the beginning, the correct posture is not domination. It's submission to the craft, to the process, to reality. That doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means thinking of yourself less. That shift alone changes how you learn, how you work, how you relate to money and ambition. You stop trying to extract outcomes and start building capability. You stop asking what the world owes you and start asking what the world rewards. The world rewards usefulness, reliability, skill, judgment, not noise. Ego wants you to skip to the reward. Discipline wants you to earn it. And only one of those paths scales without breaking you. This is where financial freedom actually begins, not with income, but with character. With the ability to delay gratification, to stay grounded, to resist the urge to signal success before it's secure. Because money amplifies who you already are. If ego is in control early, money will magnify it later. And that magnification rarely ends well. The beginning phase is about building a strong inner foundation so that when opportunity arrives, and it will, you don't collapse under its weight. You don't need to be seen yet. You don't need to be heard yet. You need to be ready. And readiness is built in silence, humility, and sustained effort. That is the paradox ego cannot accept. The fastest way forward is often to slow down, shut up, and do the work. That's where real confidence comes from. That's where durable success starts. That's where freedom is quietly prepared. And this is only the first stage. Because once you commit to the work, once aspiration is disciplined and ego is kept in check, the real challenge begins. Not starting, but continuing. Not wanting success, but sustaining effort without recognition. That's where we go next. After aspiration comes the long middle. This is where dreams either harden into discipline or dissolve into excuses. The beginning is fueled by energy and imagination. The middle is fueled by something far rarer, restraint. This is where ego becomes more subtle, more dangerous. It no longer says, I deserve this. I deserve this. It says, I've already done enough. It tells you that the early effort should now pay dividends, that the struggle phase should be over, that you're entitled to ease. But discipline doesn't work that way, and neither does reality. The middle phase is where people are made or exposed. It's where you discover whether your ambition was built on patience or impatience, on craft or craving. Because now the feedback is slower, the applause fades, the results lag behind the effort, and ego starts asking uncomfortable questions. Why isn't this happening faster? Why am I not further along? Why are others getting attention while I'm still grinding? Those questions are poison if you entertain them. The Stoics warned against this exact moment. They understood that ego grows restless when progress becomes invisible. When rewards are delayed, ego starts negotiating. It says, you've earned a break. You're good enough now. You can cut corners. You can coast. This is where mastery dies. Discipline is not intensity. Discipline is consistency without drama. It is showing up without needing validation. It is doing the work even when the work feels repetitive, even when no one notices, even when the outcome is uncertain. Ego hates repetition. It craves novelty. It wants new projects, new identities, new directions. It confuses boredom with stagnation and discipline with limitation. But boredom is often the gateway to depth. This is where financial principles intersect sharply with ego. Wealth is not built by constant reinvention. It's built by staying with something long enough for compounding to occur. Compounding requires time. Time requires patience. Patience requires humility. Ego has none of these. People with ego jump from opportunity to opportunity, chasing momentum instead of building foundations. They want the upside without the boredom, the payoff without the process. And so they remain perpetually in motion, mistaking activity for advancement. The disciplined path looks unimpressive from the outside. It's quiet, repetitive, often lonely. You do the same things again and again, refining, improving, eliminating errors. You measure progress internally, not by likes, not by attention, not by recognition. This is where you learn to subordinate ego to purpose. Purpose asks, what does this require? Ego asks, what do I feel like doing today? If ego is in charge, discipline collapses the moment motivation fades. The people who last, the ones who build real careers, real wealth, real autonomy, learn to be indifferent to short-term feelings. They do not confuse mood with meaning. They understand that feelings are weather, not direction. This applies directly to money. Ego-driven people spend emotionally. They reward themselves prematurely. They treat income as proof rather than raw material. Discipline-driven people reinvest. They delay upgrades. They think in years, not months. Ego asks, can I afford this? Discipline asks, does this strengthen my position? That difference compounds. Another danger in the middle is premature identity. Ego wants to label itself. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a leader. I'm successful. These labels feel good, but they freeze growth. Once you adopt an identity too early, you start protecting it instead of expanding it. You stop being a student. The Stoics believe that the moment you think you've arrived, you've stopped moving. Ego loves arrival because arrival feels like safety. But there is no safety in growth. Growth is a process, not a destination. This is why humility is not self-denial, it's accuracy. It's seeing yourself clearly, strengths, weaknesses, progress, and limits, without distortion. Ego distorts upward. Self-loathing distorts downward. Humility sees what is, and what is in the middle is usually unfinished. This phase tests your relationship with effort. Are you working to impress or are you working to improve? Are you building skill or are you building an image? The two paths diverge here. People who build image optimize for appearances. They take on projects that are visible, not valuable. They prioritize being seen over being useful. And usefulness, not visibility, is what creates durable opportunity. The market rewards utility, not ego. This is especially true in financial freedom. The most powerful positions are often the least visible. Ownership systems leverage these, don't announce themselves. They quietly accumulate value while ego-driven pursuits burn energy chasing attention. Discipline also means restraint in speech, saying less, promising less, explaining less, letting results speak later, must narrate the journey in real time. Discipline understands that narration steals focus. There is a reason the Stoics valued silence. Silence conserves energy. Silence sharpens observation. Silence protects progress. The middle phase is about narrowing. Fewer commitments, fewer distractions, fewer explanations, more depth. More repetition, more refinement. Ego resists narrowing because narrowing feels like limitation. In reality, narrowing is power. Concentration creates force. Dispersion creates weakness. This is why great investors concentrate capital, not scatter it. Why great craftsmen focus on fundamentals, not gimmicks. Why great lives are built around principles, not impulses. Ego wants flexibility. Discipline wants alignment. And alignment creates momentum that ego cannot sustain. Another trap here is comparison. Ego watches others. It tracks timelines. Why? It measures itself against external milestones. Discipline measures against process. Did I do the work today? Did I improve? Did I act according to principle? Comparison distorts judgment. It tempts you to abandon your path for someone else's highlights. It introduces impatience where patience is required. The Stoics warned against envy not because it's immoral, but because it's inefficient. Envy steals attention. Attention is finite. Whatever steals it steals progress. The disciplined person does not need to win today. They need to endure long enough to be inevitable. This is the mental shift that unlocks financial freedom. You stop asking, how do I win now? And start asking, how do I position myself so winning becomes unavoidable? Positioning beats timing. Structure beats luck. Ego chases outcomes. Discipline builds conditions, and conditions compound. The middle is long, longer than most expect. That's why most quit here. They mistake length for futility. They underestimate how long it takes to build something real. And ego whispers, if it hasn't happened yet, maybe it won't. But that voice is lying. Progress is often happening below the surface. Skills are stacking. Judgment is sharpening. Judgment is sharpening. Relationships are forming. Systems are stabilizing. The roots are growing. You don't dig up a seed every week to check if it's working. You tend it. You protect it. You give it time. This is the discipline ego cannot tolerate. But if you master this phase, if you learn to work without applause, to improve without recognition, to invest without immediate return, you build something ego can't touch. You build self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of all freedom. Because when you trust yourself, you don't need external validation. You don't need shortcuts. You don't need to prove anything. You just keep going. That's the middle. And it's where most of the work is done. Next comes the phase people think they want the most and understand the least: success. Because ego doesn't disappear when you win, it evolves. And that evolution is the most dangerous of all. After aspiration comes the long middle. This is where dreams either harden into discipline or dissolve into excuses. The beginning is fueled by energy and imagination. The middle is fueled by something far rarer: restraint. This is where ego becomes more subtle, more dangerous. It no longer says, I deserve this. It says, I've already done enough. It tells you that the early effort should now pay dividends, that the struggle phase should be over, that you're entitled to ease. But discipline doesn't work that way, and neither does reality. The middle phase is where people are made or exposed. It's where you discover whether your ambition was built on patience or impatience, on craft or craving, because now the feedback is slower. The applause fades, the results lag behind the effort, and ego starts asking uncomfortable questions. Why isn't this happening faster? Why am I not further along? Why are others getting attention while I'm still grinding? Those questions are poison if you entertain them. The Stoics warned against this exact moment. They understood that ego grows restless when progress becomes invisible. When rewards are delayed, ego starts negotiating. It says, you've earned a break. You can cut corners. You can coast. This is where mastery dies. Discipline is not intensity. Discipline is consistency without drama. It is showing up without needing validation. It is doing the work even when the work feels repetitive, even when no one notices, even when the outcome is uncertain. Ego hates repetition. It craves novelty. It wants new projects, new identities, new directions. It confuses boredom with stagnation and discipline with limitation. But boredom is often the gateway to depth. This is where financial principles intersect sharply with ego. Wealth is not built by constant reinvention. It's built by staying with something long enough for compounding to occur. Compounding requires time. Time requires patience. Patience requires humility. Ego has none of these. People with ego jump from opportunity to opportunity, chasing momentum instead of building foundations. They want the upside without the boredom, the payoff without the process, and so they remain perpetually in motion, mistaking activity for advancement. The disciplined path looks unimpressive from the outside. It's quiet, repetitive, often lonely. You do the same things again and again, refining, improving, eliminating errors. You measure progress internally, not by likes, not by attention, not by recognition. This is where you learn to subordinate ego to purpose. Purpose asks, what does this require? Ego asks, what do I feel like doing today? If ego is in charge, discipline collapses the moment motivation fades. The people who last, the ones who build real careers, real wealth, real autonomy, learn to be indifferent to short-term feelings. They do not confuse mood with meaning. They understand that feelings are weather, not direction. This applies directly to money. Ego-driven people spend emotionally. They reward themselves prematurely. They treat income as proof rather than raw material. Discipline-driven people reinvest. They delay upgrades. They think in years, not months. Ego asks, can I afford this? Discipline asks, does this strengthen my position? That difference compounds. Another danger in the middle is premature identity. Ego wants to label itself. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a leader. I'm successful. These labels feel good, but they freeze growth. Once you adopt an identity too early, you start protecting it instead of expanding it. You stop being a student. The Stoics believed that the moment you think you've arrived, you've stopped moving. Ego loves arrival, feels like safety, but there is no safety in growth. Growth is a process, not a destination. This is why humility is not self-denial, it's accuracy. It's seeing yourself clearly, strengths, weaknesses, progress, and limits. Without distortion, ego distorts upward, self-loathing distorts downward. Humility sees what is, and what is, in the middle, is usually unfinished. This phase tests your relationship with effort. Are you working to impress or are you working to improve? Are you building skill or are you building an image? The two paths diverge here. People who build image optimize for appearances. They take on projects that are visible, not valuable. They prioritize being seen over being useful. And usefulness, not visibility, is what creates durable opportunity. The market rewards utility, not ego. This is especially true in financial freedom. The most powerful positions are often the least visible. Ownership, systems, leverage, these don't announce themselves. They quietly accumulate value while ego-driven pursuits burn energy chasing attention. Discipline also means restraint in speech, saying less, promising less, explaining less, letting results speak later. Ego wants to narrate the journey in real time. Discipline understands that narration steals focus. There is a reason the Stoics valued silence. Silence conserves energy. Silence sharpens observation. Silence protects progress. The middle phase is about narrowing. Fewer commitments, fewer distractions, fewer explanations, more depth. More repetition, more refinement. Ego resists narrowing because narrowing feels like limitation. In reality, narrowing is power. Concentration creates force. Dispersion creates weakness. This is why great investors concentrate capital, not scatter it. Why great craftsmen focus on fundamentals, not gimmicks. Why great lives are built around principles, not impulses. Ego wants flexibility. Discipline wants alignment. And alignment creates momentum that ego cannot sustain. Another trap here is comparison. Ego watches others. It tracks timelines. It measures itself against external milestones. Discipline measures against process. Did I do the work today? Did I improve? Did I act according to principle? Comparison distorts judgment. It tempts you to abandon your path for someone else's highlights. It introduces impatience where patience is required. The Stoics warned against envy not because it's immoral, but because it's inefficient. Envy steals attention. Attention is finite. Whatever steals it steals progress. The disciplined person does not need to win today. They need to endure long enough to be inevitable. This is the mental shift that unlocks financial freedom. You stop asking, how do I win now? And start asking, how do I position myself so winning becomes unavoidable? Positioning beats timing. Structure beats luck. Ego chases outcomes. Discipline builds conditions. And conditions compound. The middle is long, longer than most expect. That's why most quit here. They mistake length for futility. They underestimate how long it takes to build something real. And ego whispers, if it hasn't happened yet, maybe it won't. But that voice is lying. Progress is often happening below the surface. Skills are stacking, judgment is sharpening. Relationships are forming, systems are stabilizing, the roots are growing. You don't dig up a seed every week to check if it's working. You tend it, you protect it. You give it time, they give it time. This is the discipline ego cannot tolerate. But if you master this phase, if you learn to work without applause, to improve without recognition, to invest without immediate return, you build something ego can't touch. You build self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of all freedom. Because when you trust yourself, you don't need external validation. You don't need shortcuts. You don't need to prove anything. You just keep going. That's the middle. And it's where most of the work is done. Next comes the phase people think they want the most and understand the least: success. Because ego doesn't disappear when you win. It evolves, and that evolution is the most dangerous of all. Success doesn't announce itself as danger. It arrives dressed as proof. Proof that you were right. Proof that the sacrifice mattered. Proof that the belief in yourself was justified. And this is exactly why it's so lethal. Failure humbles you by force. Success tempts you by reward. The Stoics warned that prosperity tests character more brutally than adversity. Adversity strips things away. Prosperity adds. And when things are added, money, praise, authority, access, you discover whether your foundation was strong or performative. Ego loves success because success seems to validate its narrative. It says I knew it. You were special. You were different. The rules don't apply to you anymore. That sentence has ended more careers, fortunes, and lives than any external enemy ever could. At this stage, the danger is not complacency alone. It's entitlement. The belief that results are now owed to you. That effort should decrease while rewards increase. That past wins guarantee future outcomes. They don't. The moment you believe success is permanent, it begins to decay. Here's the paradox. The behaviors that create success are rarely the behaviors that preserve it. Early on, you were cautious. You listened. You prepared. You double-checked. You assumed you were wrong and worked to prove yourself right. Success reverses that posture if you let it. You stop listening. You stop questioning. You stop learning. Ego replaces curiosity with certainty. That shift is subtle but devastating. I've watched people reach positions of influence, money, leadership, visibility, and slowly surround themselves with agreement. Not because they demanded it overtly, but because ego makes dissent uncomfortable. People sense it. They adjust. And soon the feedback loop is corrupted. No one tells you when you're slipping. No one challenges assumptions. No one corrects errors early, and decay accelerates. This applies directly to money. Early discipline gives way to lifestyle inflation. Restraint becomes indulgence. Systems are neglected because income still flows for now. Ego interprets momentum as invincibility. It isn't. Financial freedom is not how much you make when things are going well. It's how resilient you are when conditions change. Ego hates resilience because resilience implies vulnerability. The Stoics believed in the concept of a preparing for reversal, not pessimism, preparation. They assumed fortune would change and built lives that could absorb that change without collapse. Ego does the opposite. Ego assumes continuity. It assumes the current state is the new normal, and that assumption quietly erodes discipline. Another danger of success is role confusion. You begin to identify with the position instead of the principles that got you there. The role becomes your identity. The title becomes your self-worth. And once that happens, you stop acting in service of the work and start acting in service of the image. Image maintenance is expensive. It forces decisions that look good instead of decisions that work. It prioritizes optics over structure. It encourages risk for visibility rather than risk for leverage. This is how people with resources make irrational decisions they would have criticized earlier in their careers. Ego doesn't just want success. It wants recognition for success. That craving distorts behavior. It pulls attention outward. It makes you visible when you should be protected. It tempts you to speak when silence would be smarter, to expand when consolidation would be wiser. Success amplifies your tendencies. If you are disciplined, it can magnify discipline. If you are reckless, it magnifies recklessness. If you are ego-driven, it magnifies ego. This is why character precedes wealth. Money doesn't change who you are. It removes constraints that were hiding who you are. And constraints are useful. They force prioritization, they force humility, they force you to live within limits. Success removes those limits, and suddenly self-regulation is the only thing standing between you and excess. Most people are not trained for that. This is also where many people lose touch with reality. They mistake applause for truth. They confuse influence with insight. They forget that being listened to doesn't mean being right. The Stoics insisted on maintaining a private internal scorecard even at the height of public success. They judged themselves by effort, virtue, and discipline, not by outcomes, wealth, or praise. That internal scorecard is the only thing that keeps ego in check when the external world starts feeding it constantly. Here's a financial principle that matters here. Sustainable wealth favors boring decisions. Ego wants excitement, big moves, headlines, stories. Boring decisions don't feed ego. They feed stability, they preserve capital, they maintain optionality. Most fortunes are lost chasing excitement after they were built through discipline. Another trap is delegation without understanding. Success allows you to outsource. That's good, until you outsource awareness. Efficient leaders delegate execution, not judgment. Ego-driven leaders disengage entirely, assuming money solves competence. It doesn't. Money buys time, not wisdom. If you stop paying attention, inefficiency creeps back in. Systems decay, incentives misalign. You wake up one day wealthy on paper and exposed in reality. The successful phase requires renewed humility, not the humility of ignorance, but the humility of awareness. The awareness that you are now playing a different game with higher stakes and fewer safeguards. This is where Stoic detachment matters. You must hold success lightly, not out of false modesty, but out of realism. Fortune is external. Control is internal. If your peace depends on outcomes you don't control, you're fragile. Ego ties identity to outcome. Stoicism ties identity to conduct. That difference is everything. This is also where generosity becomes strategic. Ego hoards. Ego equates possession with security. But real security comes from reputation, relationships, and optionality. Sharing credit, distributing responsibility, building others, these are not moral gestures alone. They are stabilizers. They reduce dependence on you. They strengthen the system. A system that collapses without you is not a success. It's a performance. Success must be converted into sustainability. And sustainability requires stepping back from the spotlight, resisting indulgence, and recommitting to the same principles that worked before anyone was watching. That recommitment is rare. Most people believe they've graduated from fundamentals. They haven't. Fundamentals never change. The environment does. The stakes do. The margin for error shrinks. Success does not entitle you to break the rules. It requires you to respect them more. This is where ego either tightens its grip or finally loosens. The ones who last, who keep their wealth, their sanity, their autonomy, are the ones who treat success as responsibility, not reward. Responsibility to remain disciplined, to stay grounded, to keep learning, to remember that what brought you here must be protected from what is now trying to destroy it. And that destruction rarely comes from outside, it comes from inside. Money has a strange way of revealing ego faster than almost anything else. Early on, when you don't have much, money feels like a solution. You imagine that once you have enough, the tension will disappear, the pressure will ease, the freedom will arrive. And then you get there, or close enough, and discover something unsettling. The tension didn't vanish, it just changed shape. This is where ego becomes especially dangerous because it reframes money not as a tool, but as a mirror. It turns income into identity, net worth into self-worth, lifestyle into proof. The Stoics warned about this long before modern finance existed. They understood that wealth does not free you by default. In fact, unmanaged wealth often binds you tighter than scarcity ever did. Scarcity restricts your options externally. Ego restricts them internally. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Many people don't actually want financial freedom. They want financial validation. Freedom is quiet. Validation is loud. Freedom asks, what do I need? Ego asks, what will people think? Those questions lead to radically different financial lives. Ego-driven money decisions are expensive. They prioritize status over structure, appearances over resilience. They create fixed costs that demand constant income just to be maintained. the house that requires the job, the lifestyle that requires the stress, the image that requires perpetual performance. This is how people end up wealthy and trapped. True financial freedom is not about how much you earn. It's about how little you need to sustain autonomy. It's about flexibility, margin, and optionality. Ego hates margin because margin looks like underutilization. It hates simplicity because simplicity doesn't impress. But simplicity is power. The more complex your life becomes, the more income you need just to stand still. And the more income you need, the less free you are to make principled decisions. You become dependent on outcomes you don't fully control. That dependency is where ego quietly takes over. It tells you that you must protect the lifestyle at all costs. That stepping back is regression. That downsizing is failure. That restraint is weakness. In reality, restraint is independence. The Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort not because they hated pleasure, but because they wanted to remain immune to it. They trained themselves to need less so that fortune could never fully control them. Modern finance rarely teaches this. It teaches optimization without philosophy, growth without grounding, more without asking why. Ego loves that approach because it allows accumulation without introspection. But financial freedom without introspection is hollow. One of the clearest signs ego has entered your financial life is when your spending starts anticipating future income. You begin to live on tomorrow's success instead of yesterday's discipline. You assume continuity. You assume growth. You assume control. Those assumptions fail more often than people admit. Ego also distorts risk perception. It convinces you that because you've succeeded before, you'll succeed again under different conditions. It encourages concentration where diversification is needed and bravado where caution would preserve freedom. This is how fortunes are lost, not through ignorance, but through overconfidence. Another ego trap is visibility. Money gives you access to platforms, audiences, influence. Ego pushes you to use them prematurely or excessively, to speak on everything, to weigh in constantly, to turn opinion into identity. This creates exposure. Exposure increases pressure. Pressure reduces margin. Reduced margin forces compromises. Compromises erode freedom. The most financially independent people I've observed are often the least visible. They choose privacy over praise, control over credit, stability over storytelling. They understand something simple and rare. Attention is not always an asset. Attention attracts expectations. Expectations create obligations. Obligations reduce freedom. Ego craves attention even when it costs autonomy. Another financial principle ego resists is asymmetry. Ego wants big wins that can be attributed to brilliance. It wants stories, legends, moments. Real freedom is built through asymmetrical decisions that look small, boring, and even timid in the moment. Consistent saving, controlled spending, patient investing, declining opportunities that don't align, saying no when you could say yes. Ego wants to swing hard. Wisdom wants to stay in the game. Staying in the game long enough is how compounding works. Financial freedom is not one decision. It's 1,000 small refusals of ego. Refusing to upgrade prematurely. Refusing to impress. Refusing to confuse revenue with permanence. Refusing to let lifestyle outrun leverage. Ego tells you that money should buy indulgence. Stoicism teaches that money should buy independence. Those are not the same. Indulgence increases dependency. Independence reduces it. This is also where ego interferes with generosity. Ego gives publicly to be seen. It withholds privately out of fear. Real generosity is strategic and quiet. It strengthens networks without inflating identity. It builds goodwill without demanding recognition. Generosity done without ego stabilizes wealth. Generosity done with ego destabilizes it. Another subtle danger. Ego ties happiness to financial milestones. Once I reach X, then I'll relax. That line keeps moving. Satisfaction is always deferred. The present is always sacrificed. This creates a life lived in anticipation, not in alignment. The Stoics argued that contentment should not depend on external accumulation. Not because accumulation is bad, but because dependence is dangerous. If happiness requires more, you are never secure. Financial freedom means money enhances life, not postpones it. Ego also resists downside protection. It sees insurance, redundancy, and conservatism as pessimism. In reality, they are respect for uncertainty. Respect for uncertainty preserves freedom. The goal is not to maximize upside at all costs. The goal is to avoid ruin. Ruin eliminates all options. Stoicism is deeply aligned with this idea. Avoid catastrophic loss. Protect the base. Let gains compound. Ego wants to be exceptional. Freedom wants to be durable. Durability wins. This is why many people who win big early end up restarting later. They optimized for ego, not endurance. They mistook luck for skill and volatility for brilliance. True financial independence feels almost anticlimactic. Limactic. No dramatic turning point, no sudden explosion, just increasing calm, increasing optionality, increasing ability to walk away. Walking away is the ultimate power. If you can't walk away, you're not free, no matter how much you earn. Ego hates the idea of walking away because it feels like surrender. In reality, it's sovereignty. This is the transition point, from accumulating to preserving, from proving to protecting, from chasing to choosing. And it requires ego to finally step aside. Because money without self-mastery creates a louder prison, money with self-mastery creates silence. And silence, when chosen, is freedom. Failure has a way of arriving when you least expect it and when you're least prepared for it internally. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't care how hard you worked, how much you wanted it, or how certain you were that things would continue as they were. It simply shows up and takes something away. Status, money, momentum, reputation, certainty. This is where ego is finally cornered. Up until now, ego could argue, it could negotiate, it could rationalize. It could say, this is temporary, or oh, this isn't really failure, or I'm still ahead. But real failure strips away those narratives. It leaves you alone with what remains when the external markers disappear. The Stoics did not fear failure. They feared being unprepared for it. Because failure does not destroy you. Resistance to reality does. Ego resists reality. When something collapses, ego immediately looks for an external explanation. Someone else's fault. Bad timing. Unfair circumstances. And sometimes those explanations are even partially true. But clinging to them delays the only thing that actually matters. Adaptation. Ego wants vindication. Recovery requires acceptance. This is the moment where many people compound failure into ruin. They cling to an identity that no longer fits. They spend energy defending a version of themselves that reality has already invalidated. They burn time and resources preserving appearances instead of rebuilding substance. Stoicism teaches the opposite approach. Distinguish between what is gone and what remains. What remains is always enough. Your character, your skills, your judgment, your discipline, your ability to endure discomfort without collapsing into self-pity. Those are assets no market crash, career setback, or public humiliation can take away, unless ego hands them over willingly. Failure tests whether your self-worth was external or internal. If your worth was tied to status, failure feels like annihilation. If it was tied to conduct, failure feels like instruction. This is where people diverge permanently. Some become bitter, cynical, smaller. They retreat into resentment. They replay the loss endlessly. They let ego rewrite the story into injustice so they don't have to confront mistakes. Others become precise. They get quieter. More honest, less interested in excuses. They look directly at what failed, not to punish themselves, but to understand the mechanics. This is where growth accelerates. Failure exposes inefficiency. It reveals where leverage was false, where assumptions were lazy, where discipline eroded unnoticed. Success hides these things. Failure makes them obvious. In financial terms, failure is often the moment people finally understand risk, not intellectually, viscerally. They feel what overextension costs. They learn what happens when lifestyle outruns margin, when confidence outruns caution, when ego outruns discipline. It's painful, but it's also clarifying. The Stoics believed that adversity returns us to proportion. It shrinks problems back to their true size. It strips away entitlement. It forces gratitude for fundamentals. You learn quickly what actually matters when you are forced to rebuild. Ego hates rebuilding requires humility. It requires humility. It requires starting lower than you think you deserve. It requires patience without recognition. It requires accepting that some doors will stay closed. Not forever, but long enough to test your resolve. This is where many people quit permanently. Not because they can't rebuild, but because they refuse to rebuild without applause. They want redemption stories, not repair work. Repair work is quiet. Repair work looks like discipline without validation, saving instead of spending, learning instead of broadcasting, listening instead of speaking, being careful instead of bold. Repair work is deeply unglamorous, and that's why it works. This is also where ego finally has a chance to die, not dramatically, but practically. Ego dies when you stop needing the world to agree with you, when you stop needing recognition to act correctly, when you stop arguing with reality. Acceptance is not weakness, it is alignment. Once aligned, progress becomes possible again. There is a powerful financial lesson here. Resilience beats brilliance. Brilliant strategies fail if they can't absorb shocks. Modest strategies survive if they are built with margin. The same is true of people. The ones who last are not the most talented, but the most adaptable. Failure trains adaptability. It forces you to reevaluate assumptions, to simplify, to rebuild with fewer moving parts, to prioritize durability over excitement. Many people who experience failure later admit something uncomfortable. Life improved afterward, not because failure was pleasant, but because ego loosened its grip. Pressure decreased. Pretending stopped. Clarity emerged. They stopped chasing validation and started building stability. This is often where true financial independence is finally born, not from growth, but from restraint, from living below means, from valuing optionality over image, from choosing safety over signaling. Ego resists this because it feels like regression. In reality, it's recalibration. You don't need to return to who you were before. You need to become someone more accurate. Failure is accuracy delivered forcefully, and once accuracy is restored, rebuilding becomes efficient. You waste less energy, you make cleaner decisions, you spot bad incentives earlier. You are less impressed by appearances, less tempted by shortcuts. You understand the cost of ego now, not abstractly, but personally. That understanding is permanent if you let it be. The Stoics encourage negative visualization not to dwell on loss, but to immunize against shock. Failure does this involuntarily. It reminds you that nothing external is guaranteed. And once you accept that, you stop anchoring your peace to external outcomes. This is where real freedom begins, not when everything is going well, but when you realize you can endure when it isn't. If you can endure loss without losing yourself, you are unbreakable. Ego makes loss fatal. Humility makes it survivable. Discipline makes it useful. This is the turning point. Either you cling to what was and remain bitter, or you accept what is and become precise. Precision rebuilds faster than pride ever could. At some point, if you've endured long enough, lost enough, and rebuilt enough, something quiet happens inside you. The urgency fades. The need to prove dissolves. You stop asking the world to confirm who you are. And in that silence, you finally hear what matters. This is where ego no longer dominates any single phase of life. Not aspiration, not discipline, not success, not money, not failure. It doesn't disappear. It never does. But it stops driving. The Stoics never promised freedom from ego. They promised freedom from being ruled by it. That distinction is everything. A life without ego would be inert. A life ruled by ego is chaotic. The disciplined life is one where ego is acknowledged, constrained, and subordinated to principle. Principles are what remain when emotion fluctuates, circumstances shift, and fortune changes. By now, you've seen the pattern. Ego pushes at every stage, but it changes its mask. Early on, it says, I'm destined for more. In the middle, it says, I've done enough. In success, it says, I deserve this. With money, it says, this proves something. In failure, it says, this isn't fair. If you listen to it at every stage, your life becomes reactive instead of deliberate. The integrated life is different. It's a life where ambition exists, but it's disciplined. Where discipline exists, but it's humane. Where success exists, but it's held lightly. Where money exists, but it's subordinated to freedom. Where failure exists, but it's instructive, not defining. This is not balance as people usually mean it. It's coherence. Coherence is when your actions align with your values across contexts. When you don't have to become a different person to chase different outcomes. When the same principles guide you whether you are winning or losing. Ego fractures identity. Principles unify it. This is why the Stoics focused so obsessively on character. Not because character sounds noble, but because it's efficient. Character reduces internal conflict. It eliminates decision paralysis. It creates consistency. Consistency compounds. This applies directly to financial freedom. People often treat money as a separate domain governed by different rules than the rest of life. That's a mistake. Money simply amplifies whatever framework you already operate under. If your life is reactive, money will make you more reactive. If your life is disciplined, money will make you more stable. If your life is ego-driven, money will magnify insecurity. If your life is principled, money will expand autonomy. The integrated approach is to design a life where money serves values, not the other way around. That means you don't ask, how much can I make? You ask, what kind of life am I building and what level of money supports that without distorting it? This question alone eliminates many traps. It prevents lifestyle inflation from becoming identity inflation. It prevents ambition from becoming addiction. It prevents success from becoming fragility. You stop accumulating blindly. You start allocating intentionally. The Stoics talked about living in accordance with nature. Not nature as wilderness, but nature as reality. Limits, trade-offs, mortality, uncertainty. Ego resists all of these. It wants infinite upside with no downside, eternal recognition with no decay, control without responsibility. Reality offers none of that. The mature response is not resentment, it's cooperation. When you cooperate with reality, life simplifies. You stop fighting what you cannot control. You stop chasing what cannot satisfy. You stop performing for audiences that don't matter. You focus on what's in your control. Effort, conduct, preparation, restraint, response. That focus is deeply liberating. It frees you from comparison, from envy, from anxiety about outcomes, from fear of missing out. You realize that most of what people chase is noise. Noise consumes energy. Energy is finite. Waste enough of it and no amount of money will compensate. This is why ego is such a poor long-term companion. It is inefficient. It burns fuel for little return. Humility, by contrast, is efficient. It preserves energy. It sharpens perception. It allows learning to continue indefinitely. Humility doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means thinking accurately about yourself in relation to the world. Accuracy beats confidence. Accurate people adjust faster, learn faster, recover faster, build stronger systems. This is why the most dangerous phrase at any stage of life is, "I've got this figured out." No one ever does. The integrated life remains open, curious, adaptive, calm. Calm is the signal. When ego fades into the background, calm emerges. Decisions are cleaner. Time expands. Relationships stabilize. Work becomes purposeful instead of performative. You no longer rush toward the next thing to escape the present one. This is where freedom actually lives, not in unlimited choice, but in contentment with chosen constraints. Constraints clarify. They remove noise. They allow depth. A life with no constraints is shallow. A life with chosen constraints is meaningful. This is the final paradox ego never resolves. Freedom comes not from indulging every impulse, but from governing them. Self-governance is the highest form of independence, and independence is the foundation of any life worth building. When you reach this stage, success no longer intoxicates you, failure no longer defines you, money no longer impresses you, recognition no longer controls you. You are steady. That steadiness is rare, and because it's rare, it's powerful. You move through the world without needing to dominate it. You participate without being consumed. You build without being attached to outcomes you don't control. This is the quiet strength the Stoics admired most. Not flash, not bravado, not image, but endurance. Endurance of principle across changing circumstances. That is how you outlast ego. Not by killing it, but by refusing to let it drive. And once ego is no longer in control, something unexpected happens. Life becomes lighter. Not easier, lighter. You carry less resentment, less anxiety, less need, less performance. And in that lightness, you finally have the space to do your best work. Not for attention, not for validation, not for proof, but because it's worth doing. That is the ultimate victory. Not success over others, not wealth over scarcity, not recognition over obscurity, but mastery over yourself. Everything else was secondary and always will